This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have amazing screenwriter and producer Sandra Chwialkowska here to talk about her new release, The Ends of Things. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you, Marie. Thank you. It's really thrilled to be here.
I am beyond thrilled to talk to you. Your entire body of work, and now this new novel. Oh my goodness. But before I start getting crazy, why don't you start off with an overview of what the story is about?
Sure. So, The Ends of Things is a psychological suspense about a lone female traveler who goes missing from a luxury beach resort in the Bahamas. And our heroine, Laura, a fellow traveler, becomes fixated on this missing woman and embroiled in the police investigation that unfolds.
Well, all I can say is wow, wow, and wow again. It is so much fun. And from the beginning, I was struck by how much your background helped contribute to this. And what I mean by that is this was so cinematic. The setting was amazing. This island that you've set them on. First question, is it a real place?
It is a real place. I actually have been there. The premise for the novel was inspired by a trip I took there with a boyfriend, and for many years I had wanted to go to one of these beautiful resorts in a beautiful place, but I was always working. I was always single, and so when I found myself in a new relationship, we went, and when we get there to this couples resort, this beautiful island of Eleuthera in the Bahamas. I saw amongst all these sunbathing couples this one woman by herself. And I was so struck by her and so intrigued by her and so jealous of her that she had this confidence to come to a place like this by herself, that all these sort of strong emotions were bubbling up in me, that I knew there was something I needed to explore there. But yeah, it's a real place, and I highly recommend if you want to see pink sand, it's a place you want to put on your bucket list.
I was so struck throughout this story because you were so empathetic the way that you portrayed your main character, Laura. She's going through a lot of what you were going through, looking at the couples and evaluating herself and looking at, could I have ever done this single? I noticed that plays out for a lot of women through my lifetime where they wonder, should I be traveling by myself? Like, should I take a trip to Europe? How much have you seen that play in that women do tend to be a little more concerned for a lot of reasons, social reasons and safety reasons?
It's a big aspect of my growing up and my young adulthood where I can only speak for myself, but I feel like I was raised with a lot of fear to have fear around traveling alone, and fearing unwanted approaches or attacks or this sort of thing. And I wanted to confront those fears in the novel and to see whether or not they're warranted, to what degree we're conditioned this way, to what degree they're holding us back. Is there any merit there? And I grew up with these fears from my family, from friends, from society. But there's also this hypocrisy because I feel like as women in the world, we're also told, go out there, go after your dreams, see the world, be bold. And yet we're also being told that we're victims and that we should, be afraid. I feel like personally, I feel like even now there's a lot of mixed messaging, and I feel there's a bit of whiplash where I'm not sure. It's a bit confusing, to be honest. And so that was also an exploration in the novel to what degree we should move through the world with fear or not.
It reminded me, I went to Iceland by myself a few years ago. I got my SUV and had all my plans, and I got to a very famous spot with one of the epic waterfalls. And this gentleman came up, he was with his significant other, and he said, "Oh, do you want me to take a picture of you?" And I thought, "Oh, this is great. Yeah, I'm doing selfies otherwise." And after he handed the phone back, he said, "Well, wait, are you here alone?"
Mm.
And I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, are you just here or are you in Iceland alone? And I said, I'm in Iceland alone. And he said, oh, are you okay? And his significant other hit him. It was like, I'm sure she's fine. So it was really an interesting kind of play just for me reading your book and having traveled solo in Europe and different places and seeing that feedback from people. And like you said, our own journey as women, should we be doing this? Could we be
Mm-hmm.
doing this? And every time you do it, all those things are in the back of your head.
Or in the back of your mind, this constant judgment from society, concern that there's an inadequacy on your part to be alone in the world. So, one of the dominant questions for me with this book was, can a woman be alone, truly alone in the world, and be safe? Or are you constantly, do you constantly have a target on your back for exactly that reason?
And I loved how you explored so many women's issues. It wasn't just solo travel. Through Laura, you explore a lot of things that women go through in their daily lives. And I appreciated that you put it on the page from looking at other women. Am I dressed well enough? Am I fit enough? What are they eating? Should I order what they're ordering? Because that will impact what males think of me and maybe what the other females think of me. You just laid it all out there. And I thought that was so beautiful because I think every woman in the world can relate to everything you put on the page.
I'm so glad to hear you say that because I was definitely tapping into my own feelings and insecurities that I've had throughout my life. And I see Laura as a very relatable. She's very deeply flawed in many ways. She's a catastrophizer. She imagines the worst case scenario. And she has a lot of penchant for self doubt. But I also hope that she's deeply relatable in that way, that we've all tapped in to some of these insecurities, whether it's around solo travel or a tendency to compare our lives with our friends, with strangers we see, with people on social media and their curated, Instagram grids. It's definitely a theme that runs through the book, appearance versus a reality, with respect to Laura on a journey of self-discovery, but also in terms of what happens when a woman disappears and what follows from that.
And that setup, oh my goodness, the questions constantly trying to figure out this puzzle. It was so intricate, so well done because so much of it relies on subtlety, glances, tones of voice. What was kind of your methodology with this story?
That's a great question. So as I mentioned before, the premise came to me on vacation where I saw this very confident woman on vacation alone who looked like she was having the best time. And so when I went home from the vacation, I was still thinking about her and about these conflicting emotions in me, intrigue, jealousy, anger, frustration that I knew I had to unpack and explore. But I was also really taken. I love mystery stories and I love the setup of a woman disappearing, especially in a beachy, beautiful, idyllic place. I wanted to play with those tropes of the mystery genre. But I love stories of self discovery as well. And I think just deep down, I wanted to explore these things that we're talking about. I wanted to do it through the lens of a mystery as Laura is learning as much about herself as she is trying to unpack who this mystery woman is who disappears.
And because Laura is a flawed person, we don't know how much you, as the author, through Laura, are playing with us. Is she an unreliable narrator? Are the things that she's telling us accurate? If she says she went to sleep, did she go to sleep? It was so much fun, and you really wove it together so well.
Thank you. And it's funny you mentioned the unreliability. My favorite types of protagonists in novels aren't so much unreliable narrators, but narrators who aren't aware that they're unreliable. And to some degree, I had a bit of blindness myself because when I wrote the first draft and then went back and read it, I realized, oh, I think I'm a catastrophizer too. I don't think I was really cognizant that I had some of the same issues as Laura. It was only upon reading the writing and seeing, oh, okay, I need to explore some of this in myself. So, and I like that because there's no trick being played on the reader. It's more just she's seeing the world through a specific lens that I think a lot of other people sometimes see the world through that same lens.
A lot of us, we look at that term, right? Unreliable narrator. To a large degree, unwittingly, for all the reasons you just laid out with Laura, most of us are unreliable narrators in our own lives. We judge conversations, we judge actions that we've taken in our own lens, and it's usually highly biased, right? Or it might be, like you said, whether it's you see catastrophe or fear everywhere, it's through that lens. So there's always a level of inaccuracy in the way that we all narrate our own lives. So the way that you dealt with that was just brilliant.
Oh, thank you. No, I agree. I really think that we all build mythologies about ourselves as we move through the world, right? We craft these stories about our lives, and they're based on things we remember, or more specifically, misremember from our past. A big fight we could have had with a friend, a very close friend that led to a falling out. We only remember the side of the argument that is convenient, that feeds the narrative that we have. We're unwilling to necessarily be more objective. We constantly have confirmation bias. And so that's one of the other aspects of the story is there's this friendship that was very formative for Laura, our hero, that went badly, that had a falling out. But that friendship, as many friendships in girlhood do, really crafted and informed the adult that she became for good and bad, for positive and negative. And similarly, when this woman disappears, Laura's taking all the clues that she knows about this woman before she went missing and begins to craft a mythology around what happened. And so the story is very much about that, about how much we hear what we want to hear versus the whole story, the whole picture.
And just as you were fearless and honest in your examination of aspects of what it means to be a woman in modern society, you were also fearless in showing us the range of strong female characters. Because I think sometimes we stereotype, oh, it's the strong chick because she's carrying a gun or has an Uzi on her shoulder or she's martial arts fighter. But many women, and you show us glimpses of different types of women who are all on the same path, right? We're all facing the same struggles, but everyone has their own way of dealing with it. And I thought it was so beautiful how you were able to show us strength in all of these people and growth in all of them. Girls should read this book.
It's a great tag. Girls, read this book.
Yes, girls read this book. Yeah, it was, the fear element was also so important because I think more of us are afraid of things than we let on. And I think, like when you talk about people who are, obsessed with catastrophe, or some people who think, you seem to think nothing ever bothers them. Everybody's got their fears. And I think it's just who's vocalizing when, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it gets hard for people to get in someone else's head. Fear is usually something that most people keep close to the vest. Have you found that too?
I have found that. And I have found that some of the people that I assume are the most confident and the most fearless actually harbor the most fear and insecurity when you look beyond the facade. And I have found that some of the reactions to my book are such where a lot of readers tend to like really strong protagonists who are fearless. They have really strong reactions to that. And I found that so interesting because I think we all have some degree of fear or inadequacy or insecurity that hinders us or prevents us from trying things or diminishes our joy. And I find that the most interesting to read about, and those vulnerabilities as well as to write about. So I have found that surprise that the people that seem to be the most confident are actually masking and fronting the most.
Kind of dovetailing on that, coming back to Laura, I see her as actually such a strong character because she is beset by more concerns you would think than the average person, because she's constantly analyzing. She's not just laying, soaking up the sun. She's thinking, she's looking, she's watching, she's comparing. But at the same time, because she's doing that, I feel like she's wanting the answers. Wait a minute, how come they're where they are? How do
Mm-hmm.
I get there? There was so much inherent strength in her that she keeps asking those questions, and is aware and is able to point out her own flaws.
It's really generous of you to say that about her. I think so too. I think self-awareness is a form of strength. I think it's easy to kind of turn a blind eye. And I think if someone disappeared from a beach resort, a lot of people would just look the other way and be focused on their own vacations, right? Vacations are expensive. You get them made, if you're lucky, once a year. And so to become concerned about the well-being of a stranger is something that not a lot of people would become involved in. So I root for Laura in that way. That just that concern about another woman that she doesn't really know very well.
Me too. And I thought that was very poignant because there's a lot of people who don't share her opinion that you should get involved if a single woman alone disappears. Some people are outright saying, well, why would I spend my time doing that? I'm sure it'll work out. And
Mm-hmm.
whether they are sure it will work out or whether it's convenient for them and what they want in that moment, it was, again, just a very honest look at human behavior.
Thanks for noticing that. Some of my favorite, whether it's books or television shows, I love observing those microdynamics between people, between the nuances of relationships, and how you can sort of stress. One incident can put stress on a relationship, and see how it can sort of unravel from one point of conflict is really fascinating to me.
The other thing I think, just kind of, again, this was just such an amazing thought provoking book for so many reasons, mainly because you were so honest with it. And this happens too. Men do this sometimes in relationships, but I think has always been kind of a societal push for women to be something in the relationship and to fit an ideal. Laura's grappling with that. She's not someone who's always in a relationship. And the fact that you did take that on, and she has points where she's like, okay, well, I'll just do this, whatever it is. I'll be this, I'll eat this, I'll do that because it's what's expected or because this person will be happy with me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is Laura is the woman who was single for many years, and so she crafted an identity around being single. And one of the shocking discoveries she makes is when she enters a new relationship, nothing really changes for her. She's the same person, but she finds that everyone around her treats her differently, and that there's this sudden implied status from being in a relationship, but also expectation. And that's one of the aspects of the book. Is, as an example, everyone in her life, her friends, her mother, her boyfriend, prefer when she wears her hair down, and she hates having her hair down. But when she meets this woman at the resort, the woman actually tells her, your hair looks better pulled up, which is how Laura likes it. And it's this small detail, but it's like this stranger sort of sees Laura for who she really is and likes it. And for Laura, that's a huge moment of approval, or this confidence that you can be seen for who you are and loved for that, and you don't have to constantly be performing. So that's a small moment, but it's the beginning of a shift towards sort of more self-acceptance.
I absolutely love that. And I was like, girl, you pull that hair up and I don't care. You
Pull the hair
messy bun
down.
that.
Messy bun.
You go messy bun all day. I'll be all there for it. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about was on your social media, when this book came out, you posted about an orchid.
Oh.
And orchids are tropical flowers, so I thought that was perfect. But if you wouldn't mind sharing the message about that, because I thought it was really beautiful and ties so much into this book for so many reasons.
Oh, sure. Right before the pandemic started, I bought this orchid in the grocery store because they're one of my favorite flowers. And almost immediately, all the blooms just fell off. And I took that as sort of a bad sign. And then 2020 came around, and that's when I decided to start writing the manuscript for the book. And then the pandemic hit. And so the world went quiet, and the world went through a lot of despair, right? A lot of people got sick, industry sort of shut down. It was a really emotionally difficult time for the whole world. And around that time, I was writing this manuscript sort of in a vacuum. I was also trying to have a baby through IVF. And for several years, it was just nonstop failure and rejection and just hardship. And I finished the manuscript, and it was on submission, and I just kept receiving passes and passes and passes. And the rejection on both fronts, on my fertility journey and my publication journey, kept reaffirming this mythology that I had about myself, that I'm not good enough as a writer to be published, and I'm never going to be a mother. And it just was happening at the same time. So it was really tough. And then one day, this orchid suddenly these buds appeared out of nowhere. Like nothing changed. It was in the same windowsill. Like there was no difference. But they just appeared out of nowhere. And I remember getting goosebumps. And so I took it as a sign, like just keep going. Just keep going if you can. Just find the strength. And so I did. And then within 10 days, these buds just bloomed into this massive orchid that was so heavy, I thought it was going to topple over. And almost back to back, I an offer came in from Blackstone for publication, and the IVF worked. And suddenly I was like, I was pregnant with my daughter, editing my novel, and then the baby is born, my book comes out, this book launch, it's all just, there was a sudden period of intense abundance that was truly overwhelming. I don't recommend having a baby when you're trying to launch a debut novel, but at the same time, I couldn't have anything but gratitude. It was just very overwhelming and intense that it was happening at the same time, and traveling cross country for the launch, for the baby, for the first time. Anyway, it was all very intense. But when I look back now, I realize that those fallow periods are as important as the really creative periods, and it's really hard to appreciate it in the time because you just feel like rejection's never going to end. You're just always going to be, on the wrong side that you want to be on. But those periods are really important for reflection, which leads to insight, and that it does end up helping the writing. And then when it does happen, there's just that much more gratitude, because a lot of it's just luck and timing on both counts, right? Anyone who's been through IVF knows luck and timing is, and so there's a lot of commonality in terms of the gestation on both journeys, but that's the story of the orchid.
Well, I can only say I rejoice with you at all of your success. It is very well deserved, both on the mommy front and on the book front. Absolutely wonderful. And thank you for sharing that. I didn't know if you felt comfortable with it, but it's a beautiful story of inspiration.
Oh, thank you. I wish that there were as many websites devoted to failure and rejection as there are to success. Sadly, our society is so in love with success. And so for most people, most of your life is things not working out the way you want them to. And success is such a, ephemeral thing. It's such a lucky thing that when it does happen, we grab a hold of it. But most of the creative life is how to move through rejection, how to learn from failure and how to get better. It's so much of what the process is that you don't know when you're starting it. You have to kind of like learn when you're on the bottom and how to pick yourself back up. So I'm happy to talk about it because I wish there was more out there in the discourse around that, because we all, except for a few lucky people, I think most of us deal with it way more than we deal with success.
That's a very, very, very good point, because if we look at how many hours in our lives that we actually feel successful versus we feel like we're grinding, we feel like we're down at the bottom of the pile again, it's very much an inverse relationship. You almost think as we're raising new generations that we should warn them about that yes, you want success, but don't expect it's going to be a 24/7 thing, because unfortunately it doesn't work out that way.
I think you need the kind of blind ambition and this naive confidence to even embark, on a creative life. Um, but yeah, nothing can really prepare you for the emotional challenges around failure, except hitting the bottom and then finding your own way, back up, to pick yourself back up, to keep going. Because yeah, persistence is like the whole ball game.
Yeah, I sometimes think you have to be comfortable with getting punch drunk. That feeling of getting punched in the face enough and just saying, okay, I'm just going to keep getting up and taking it in the face until I don't. Well, thank you, Sandra, again, that show of empathy that you have that translates so well on the page and into our hearts when we read it. Now, for your existing fans, obviously droves of fans all over the world because of everything that you've done on the screen, and I am certain droves of new fans for this book. Where is the best place for people to find you?
You can find me on my website, which is sandra-c.com, and I'm also on Instagram.
And thank you again, Sandra. Wonderful read. Great way to get out of wherever you are and to think about the things that matter in life. Again, the book is The Ends of Things.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.